Greetings and welcome to a very special presentation that is sponsored by the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals and the United States Census Bureau, the New York Regional Census Center. My name is John Raphael and I'm the Director of Educational Services here at the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals. And we are really thrilled today to offer our listeners and viewers a really great opportunity to learn about what the census is, what it means to you, certainly what it means to you as a direct support professional, the implications of the census when it comes to supporting people with disabilities. And with that said, I'm going to hand it immediately over to Bob Scartamalia, who is a partnership specialist, and he can explain who he is a little bit more. But he's going to really take us on a little journey to understand more about our 2020 census. And without further ado, Bob, take it over.
John, thank you very much, and thank you to the Alliance for allowing the Census Bureau this opportunity to speak to direct service providers. We're what's a partnership specialist? A partnership specialist with the Census Bureau at this point in the decade is somebody who works to develop relationships with local organizations to get the word out about the importance of the census. That's it in a nutshell. We work with community organizations, local governments, libraries, schools, pretty much anybody that we can get in touch with who has a voice in the community. And so you're important voices. We need to get this message of what the census is about to what we call trusted voices. Individuals have varying degrees of information about the census, and the more that we can get them accurate information about why this is important and how to respond, the better off we will be, and the easier our job, the Census Bureau's job, is of counting the population. So I'm going to go through a standard presentation that we use that touches on a number of aspects of what this process is and why it's important and why we want to connect with organizations like the Alliance to help us get the word out and make sure that everybody gets counted. If my screen will advance. There we go. So the Census Bureau is our primary statistical agency in this country. It's the largest statistical agency in the US. The census is pretty much what people, obviously in the name, and people associate the decennial census with the Census Bureau, but our activities go on throughout the decade. You see here on this slide just a few of the census surveys that are done that keep us up to date with the demographic and economic changes and housing changes in our country. So these demographic programs and economic programs, they continue throughout the decade. And one of the things that's important to understand is that means that there is census field work and survey activity going on in our communities throughout the country to support these surveys. So it's quite often that you'll see folks from the Census Bureau out in the field conducting these surveys. This time with the 2020 census, the decennial census, it's a completely different operation and much larger operation that I'll get to in a few minutes. We have a pretty simple message. So the bold headline here, count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. That's pretty much our job. Count everybody once. Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, right up front in our Constitution, there's the requirement to conduct a census. And that census is to count everyone who is resident in this country on April 1st. So that's the count everyone once. We want to touch everybody and get them counted. Only once means that there are some populations where there's an opportunity to double count. A couple of good examples that most of us will recognize, snowbirds. People with multiple residences, they will get an invitation to the census at 2 residences. Question is, what's the place where they should be counted? And that's their usual place of residence or where they're staying on April 1st. When if by chance a snowbird responded with 2 addresses, then we would work to remove that duplicate, identify and remove those duplicates. So we want to count everybody, but we only want to count them once, and we want to count them in the right place. And that right place is important for the primary reason of taking the census, which is the Constitution, because the census is used to define representation among Congress, among our state legislative districts. And so we have to have people in the right place, count them in the right place. Now, it's not a small job. You can see 330 million people, 140 million housing units. This operation has to take place over a relatively short time period. This job has to pretty much be completed, the count part of it, completed in about a 4-month time frame. So it's a massive undertaking. It's the largest peacetime effort our government engages in. Every 10 years we go through this. It's important for representation and funding. And our other important message is at the bottom: the census is safe, easy, and important. And that's what I want to be able to continue describing. So I've already talked about the use for the census for dividing the seats in the House of Representatives by state. That happens every 10 years. And that state population count is what will dictate the number of seats that will occur, that each state will get in Congress. And I mentioned it goes below that to state legislative districts and local districts. It's not just about representation and power in Washington and our local governments, though. There's the distribution of a tremendous amount of money. $675 billion gets distributed in federal funding based in one part or another on census information. And you can see this next bullet is just a sampling of programs that the data supports. Community action programs, free lunch programs, Head Start, foster care, health services, transportation, all of these different programs and many, many more use data on this from the census to allocate those funds. And so the simple way of explaining this is we need to count everybody so that our communities get their fair share. Whatever their share of these funding dollars are, if everybody gets counted, they will be getting their fair share. And it's not just for governmental programs. Businesses use these data, community organizations for planning, for understanding target customers and markets and service populations. The census and all those surveys that are tied to it are our benchmark for understanding who we are: demographics, housing, economics. Census is safe, all right? This is an important point. This is a critical point to get to the population, especially in our world today where people are anxious about the security of their information. Our private information is never, ever published out of the Census Bureau. It is not accessible. That includes our names and addresses and where we live, telephone numbers. None of that information is accessible to the public. It is all private, confidential, and protected. We collect this data so that the results are reported in the aggregate. So for our individual community, we'll understand, we'll learn how many people there are and what characteristics. So that personal information is only available publicly in the aggregate. It's not available to the courts, to agencies, to anyone else. Personal information is absolutely confidential. And that confidentiality is guaranteed under federal law. Title 13 dictates that release of that personal information is a federal crime. When I took the job with the Census Bureau, I took an oath to maintain that confidentiality, not just while I'm working for the Census Bureau, but for life. That means that if I divulge census information, personal information, I'm subject to 5 years in prison and a fine of $250,000 or both. We take this seriously, and the census data is absolutely private. Cybersecurity in our world today is in the news frequently. And what we need to ensure in the Census Bureau systems is that we're operating at the highest level of security. So that means that whenever somebody responds to a census questionnaire online, that information is encrypted and it's safe and secure. As soon as that submit button gets hit, the data is encrypted so that it can't be retrieved by anyone outside. We're following all of the best practices. This is testing that's going on continually to make sure that our systems are up to the standard that's necessary, because the Census Bureau operates at a different standard than most other organizations and businesses. This information, the public's knowledge that their census data is safe and protected is critical to our operation and our complete count. It's also easy. Again, there's a lot of misperception about how difficult the census might be and that they ask all these questions. Well, there's not a lot that's on the decennial census. Okay? And new to the 2020 census is the online response. That did not exist in 2010 and prior censuses. The security, cybersecurity and confidentiality ability, technology at that time was not sufficient to meet our standards. Today, that's been met. And so online is one of the easiest and safest ways to respond. And it's also an efficient and cost-effective way to respond. Online response saves the taxpayers money because the other forms of response end up costing a fair amount of money to complete. So online, we encourage that response. We understand that not everybody has that capability, and I'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. You can also respond by phone. So the invitation will include your online information to respond if you can. It will include telephone numbers so that you can call up and talk to a human and complete the census questionnaire. There's also a paper option, and I'll explain that a little bit more detail. That's what many of us may remember from prior censuses, that we filled out a paper form. We will encourage most everybody to respond by phone or online, but there will be folks who will respond by paper. And the last form, well, let me pause a moment. Those three forms, online, phone, and paper, are what we call self-response. And what we really want to do is encourage the residents to self-respond. They self-respond, they've done their civic duty, they've responded to the census, and we've captured their data, and everything works very well and efficiently. If you don't self-respond, then that final bullet, personal visit by census employee, that's when somebody comes and knocks on the door, because every one of those 130 million household addresses has to be followed up on. We have to count everybody. And so we will do that by one of these four methods. And again, this next bullet, there is not a lot of information that we're being asked to give the Census Bureau in the decennial census. Our name, our sex, our age and date of birth, our race and Hispanic origin, and a couple of administrative questions. Do you stay somewhere else? That's used to remove those duplicates if they occur. The relationship to the person who fills out the questionnaire. So and that's it. We're not asking about income and other detailed information in the decennial census. It's a very short and sweet questionnaire. This bottom part is really important, and it goes to that confidentiality and security part of the census. We will never ask for a Social Security number or for money or donations or any banking information or political party affiliation. That is not part of the census process. And it's an important message to you and the folks that you provide services to, that if they are contacted by somebody asking for that information, it is not the Census Bureau. It has got to be crystal clear, and people have to understand we are only asking for the information required in the census, and none of this other information will be asked by the Census Bureau. We live in a very diverse country, and increasingly diverse as days go by. And we recognize that not everyone is a primary English speaker, that there are many, many, many languages spoken in our country, and even in some of us, our smallest remote rural communities. So we support that language variation, diversity in a number of systems. The online and phone systems will be available in these 12 different languages. So if you call up and you speak Russian or Vietnamese, you will get a Russian or Vietnamese human person speaking, and you will be able to, who will help administer the questionnaire and make sure it gets answered. So those languages will cover most of the population in our country. There'll be a lot of support information for those languages and others. Those we recognize that those 12 languages aren't all of them, and we have support systems for many other languages. So the 12 languages will be available in internet response and phone response, in questionnaire assistance. There will be language guides and other resources to help support providers and community organizations that work with non-English speaking populations. So again, these guides will help explain the process, the terminology, so that there can be translation and assistance to non-English speakers in many of these other languages. There will also be certain areas, and I'll give you a little look at this in a moment, where the questionnaire will be in bilingual, both English and Spanish, and that will be targeted towards areas that, based on the data that the Census Bureau collects, we understand to be heavily Hispanic residents. And so we'll try and meet that more immediate need with a bilingual questionnaire. Of the process, we're getting really close. Today is February 12th. In just a month, on March 12th, will be the initial mailing to households. So you can see that between March 12th and March 20th, most everybody will get an invitation in the mail to respond to the census. That invitation will, again, encourage online response as the fastest and easiest and efficient way. It will include phone information in those languages for those who are non-English speakers. And there are some locations in our country where that initial invitation will also include a paper questionnaire. I happen to live in one of those areas, and I'll show you a map in a minute. We encourage response during that time period, and we hope that most people will, and we'll encourage them to do that. If they don't respond quickly when that first mailing goes out, in that March 16th to 24th time period, we'll send them a reminder letter. And basically that reminder letter will say, we sent you your invitation for the census, and we really need you to participate and complete it. And please do that as quickly as possible. By the end of March and early April, if you still haven't responded, those self-response mechanisms, you'll get a reminder postcard. And then if you still don't respond in that second week of April, the 8th through the 16th, you'll get another reminder letter and a paper questionnaire. So anybody who does not self-respond by internet or phone will ultimately get a paper questionnaire, but we'd really rather they respond by the internet or by phone. And then if they still don't respond with that paper questionnaire towards the third week in April, then they're going to get a final postcard reminder, and that will be followed by personal visit. That's when the knock on the door will occur, and we'll follow up on all those households that have not responded. So this is a map, and I show you New York because I'm here in New York, but this is a nationwide map. You can get on the, I find one of the easiest ways is to Google Census Map Contact Strategies Viewer. And you can get this publicly accessible map application to look at the type of areas that will get different types of responses. So I'm showing you just a part of this, And you'll notice that here in New York, we have a lot of light purple and light green areas. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that those light purple areas are going to, their invitation is going to be encouraging internet first as an option, and it will be in English. There will be some areas, if let's see, if you look down here in the New York metropolitan area, in New Jersey, you'll see some dark purple areas, and those areas will get that invitation, a bilingual invitation, because they have large Hispanic populations. The green areas will certainly be invited to respond by internet, but we recognize that there are areas of our country that don't have broadband, don't have easy access to the internet, and so internet will be an option, but they will also get a paper questionnaire. And that's where I am. I'm in this little town here in Albany County, and my town is going to get that paper questionnaire. I have internet access and I will respond by the internet, but if by chance it's not working, I can always send in that paper questionnaire. You can get this information for the entire country. These other areas that you see in New York, this is the Adirondacks of New York. Most every state will have somewhat remote regions that we will be delivering a questionnaire to rather than using this invitation, household invitation, and internet response. Excuse me while I wet my throat. So there are a couple of ways. One of the reasons we do these presentations and try and interact with the community is to ask for your assistance. And the two important ways that you can help us in this census process is by spreading the message. We need to work through trusted voices, community leaders who the residents will listen to and trust that message that the census is safe, easy, and important. So we ask you to do that. When you interact with the public, with your friends and neighbors, assure them that the census is important to your communities and that it is safe and easy to respond to. We also need you to help promote our need for jobs. This is across the country. That knock on the door phase, that follow-up phase of the census that will start in late April, May through June, and possibly into July, requires an army of people to complete that operation. So we're asking you, if you know of friends and neighbors who are looking for work, in our Albany area here, it's $20 per hour, and that rate is variable, but it's a very attractive rate. So we ask you to also encourage people to get on the website, 2020census.gov/jobs. It's an easy registration process and application, and we need as many people as we can recruit. Those jobs are the big numbers of people that we need are the enumerator positions, field positions, but we're also recruiting for a number of other positions to help support the census activity. You see, I've got an example here for New York. Our goal is to recruit 171,000 people. That's in New York. That's a large ask. That's a challenge for us, particularly with low unemployment rates. And if I were to do this for the entire country, we're talking about 2+ million people that we need to recruit in order to get the number of workers for the census. So it's a challenge. So anything you can do to help to get the word out that census jobs are available is a big help for us. We've completed some of these milestones already, the first couple in August and through the fall. And we are in this period of January through March where you're probably seeing a lot of national media advertising. We have a large advertising campaign that began in January and will continue right through the census process. We are currently now engaged in what we call group quarters enumeration. Now we're doing an advance contact with group quarters. Group quarters are those group living situations. You see some examples here. college dormitories, prisons, nursing homes, service-based locations, those shelters and soup kitchens. We're contacting them to make sure that we understand their location and the best way of enumerating population. And so that early contact operation is going on as we speak across the country. Mid-March, that's when we start sending out those invitations and people start replying. April 1st is the actual census date. May through July, we continue with that follow-up operation. And December 31st is a legal requirement that the Census Bureau must complete the tabulation of all of this data and release state population counts to the president. Those population counts will be the basis for determining how many seats each state gets in Congress. So keep in mind, 330 million people have to be counted in about a 4-month time period, tabulated, reviewed, and delivered to the president by December 31st. It's a mammoth operation. We encourage, as partnership specialists, we encourage the local formation of what we call complete count committees. This may sound more onerous than it really is. I view the National Alliance as a complete count committee because they're doing things that we were asking them to do in terms of commitment. Right now, sponsoring this webinar, they're getting information out to leaders across the country. That's an important commitment to disseminate information about the census. But in some cases, it may involve a local county, and counties across the country are being asked to form complete count committees where they bring together representatives from libraries and employment services and various organizations that are important to that community. Those leaders at the county level and local level, they understand their communities best. They know the people that should be involved in spreading the word, and they will help develop a strategy for reaching their particular community. Our communities vary greatly across the country, and so it's important to have local folks involved in that strategy because they know who to reach and how best to reach them. We're pretty well along in some of these phases. We're really heavily into the awareness and motivation phase. Awareness with that public communications plan, media plan, and motivating individuals to respond, making sure that they know what to do with that invitation when they get it. The reminder, that timetable of when they will get reminders and when the follow-up process will start. And then we come back in the summer and thank all of our partners and the country in general for participating and getting us as complete a count as possible. So as a partnership specialist, the Census Bureau works through us to support local organizations. And we do that by providing promotional materials, by speaking to organizations as I am today, by being at events, by doing whatever we need to do to help get the word out about the census. So the promotional flyers, we have a whole host of promotional flyers. So the website that you see here, 2020census.gov/partners, will lead you to outreach materials. And there are flyers for many of our different audiences. And by audience, I mean different diverse populations and community populations, faith leaders and diversity leaders, governmental leaders, media, toolkits, schools. All of those represent messaging packages that we can use to help get that content out. So as partnership specialists, we will help you with those materials. We'll get them in touch with you. We can order bulk materials for local events, and we will be there as a presence to help explain this process and help the population understand how we connect with people and how we get the job done. So what we ask for you to do now is kind of what I've already explained. Share that information about the job recruitment needs, that the census is safe and easy and important. Become a partner. There are partnership specialists like me across the country. And so we all work to identify local community organizations and get in touch with them and see how we can help get the message out. And so you can become a partner. Go to the Census Bureau's website and look at the materials and see how you might be able to use them. Encourage your local government or county officials to start a complete count committee, and we will be there to support them, and any other types of opportunities that we might be able to engage in to help get that message out. This is another mapping application, and I won't speak for long about this, but I want to make you aware that it's another publicly accessible system, Response Outreach Area Mapper. You know, the Census Bureau is all about data that helps our communities. And so our targeting, our mission is data driven. And this is one of the tools, and it's available publicly to help complete count committees and help local organizations target their resources. And what this shows us and you is those areas that we expect to either be high self-responders or low self-responders. The dark areas you see, and again, I'm showing you New York, but this is a nationwide application. The dark green turquoise areas that you see here are areas that, based on data, characteristics about the communities, we anticipate will be low self-responders. That's important to us. It's important for partnership specialists because those are areas we need to target through schools and libraries and other organizations to get the message out that it's important to respond and self-respond. It's also important for us targeting our resources for that follow-up phase, because if in fact those areas do not self-respond, we need to be mobilized in those areas. And so it helps us target our resources, and it helps you identify characteristics of areas that are important, that may be more of a challenge in terms of our ability to count them and self-respond. And there's a tremendous amount of data that comes with this system. So I've zoomed in here to an area, we're here in Albany County, and this is Albany, New York. You can, again, this is a nationwide application, so you can use this to zoom into your own local areas. In the dark areas, when you click on each of these dark areas in the application, you get a whole host of data. And this is just a subset of the data, and it identifies the community. And helps us, helps you in targeting the characteristics of the community that are most in need of outreach and materials, partnership materials and information that is easily digested. There's a whole section of language needs in this data. And so if there are diverse populations with non-English language needs, it helps identify the extent of that targeted population. So again, Census Bureau is all about data. When this data comes out, it will be a critical resource for our communities. We have an entire branch of the Census Bureau that will help you understand it, help your communities understand it, put you in touch with the data, access the information, and we will do presentations, workshops, online webinars, anything that will help your community find the data that's necessary and how to access it and use it within your community. There's available a website on YouTube. You'll see the link here where there's a training video for the internet response. Now this, I'm not going to do the video. It's relatively short. I encourage you to get on the YouTube website and watch the video. It describes the entire question online response process, and it's a 6.5-minute video. So it kind of gives you a look at how, certainly what the questions are, how the system you'll interact with the system, and how relatively simple and easy it is in terms of the amount of data. So you'll see if you looked at the whole page, there would be a globe up here at the top that you could click on to get language information, but also at the bottom there's this bar where you can click on particularly one of the 12 languages if you need this translated into a particular language. But once you start the questionnaire, you will be led through each of the questions and steps along with information about who to include and who not to include, and how to quickly and easily get through the questionnaire. I encourage you to watch this, particularly as service providers. If you understand that process, you can help your clients, your patients, respond to the census. You can walk them through that process, and it'll be a lot easier for everybody. A couple last things I want to note. There are particular populations that need a special focus. One of those is children. Census Bureau estimates that in 2010, the 2010 census missed about 1 million children under the age of 5. Now, that's a critically important population. If they aren't in the census and they're under the age of 5, that means they don't get picked up for another 10 years in the census. And that is basically most of their young childhood. So free lunch information, health information, Medicaid information, other resources that utilize and are focused on children are not accurate, and they are not reflecting the community's share of population and their need for those dollars and resources. So it's a particularly important population. And finally, you all touch a critically important population, one that may have difficulties in responding and understanding the process, may be anxious about the process, may not respond, and may be picked up in that follow-up operation when we come around and knock on doors. And a lot of people, seniors and others, can get anxious about somebody unknown coming to the door. Census employees will always have identification and be identifiable for the census process, but the best thing to do is get people to self-respond. If they self-respond, they're done. They've done their civic duty, and they can avoid that process, that follow-up process of follow-up and the knock on the door. We're accessible on social media. You can follow the Census Bureau on all of these platforms, and you'll get regular updates. And again, to the extent that your organizations can share that information, you become valuable partners. Social media has become one of the most valuable ways of sharing information. So as local providers, your organizations can be valuable partners with the Census Bureau by sharing that information. And finally, I'll end and see if there are any questions. My contact information is here, as well as our general partnership outreach information, links for Census Jobs and our data dissemination program. My understanding is that the webinar is being recorded and will be available to you afterwards, so you'll be able to access this information. And with that, I will stop and see if there are any questions.
Well, Bob, thank you very much. This is John Raphael again, and you've given us a real great overview and really a deep dive into the census. I mean, I learned stuff that I didn't know, and I bet you those that were on today learned quite a bit, and it's very enlightening. And I'm actually inspired that this the notion of the census really has great impact. And so thank you for this. As for questions, there's no questions from our viewers, but I had just one or two.
Okay.
So a lot of the people that are our members and work as direct support professionals, and thank you for talking about the importance of the representation of people with disabilities and the elderly and children. But sometimes we will support somebody who doesn't use language to speak, right, and who might have a pretty a severe intellectual and a profound intellectual disability. So the question is, so say it comes to the point where there's a visit, a knock on the door, whether it's a group home or a person's home, is it okay for another person, like a direct support professional, to supply information to a census taker? or how does that work? Because I know that might be a question among direct support professionals, given HIPAA, which is health information confidentiality. How does that work, Bob?
I will give you a little bit of an answer, but there are aspects of that that I'm not 100% certain on. So I want to get a clearer answer and get that back to you, John, so that you can distribute the information.
Okay.
But the question comes up in a number of different contexts, like we're looking at libraries as being primary support centers for response, and people will come in and be able to respond in a library if they don't have that internet access. My understanding would be, and this is what I want to clarify to be sure, that if the support person is there with the individual and the census person would be at the door, that they would be able to provide assistance in that process.
Okay.
If folks are in a group living situation, a group situation, then there are other mechanisms, and that's part of this advanced group quarters visit, to identify those facilities and how best to enumerate them. So I've had some direct questions from senior services folks here in the Albany area that I've reached out to. In a nursing home with dementia patients, they're not able to respond, and so there are administrative processes for getting that information out also, and that's what this advanced group quarters operation is designed to meet. So I'll get you more detail about exactly what level of assistance or direct provision of data to a census enumerator can be done.
That'd be great. That'd be really good, because I'm sure we'll get that question somewhere along the way. Another quick, I guess, an observation more than a question, or I think I don't know. This is kind of hopeful, because we're in a at least our field, the field of human services and direct support, and the support of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, many of whom rely on Medicaid and Medicaid funding and public funding. What I gather from what you've presented, this data is so vital for getting back to those people that make the policies and that make the arrangements for rate setting. So it's not only a civic duty, it seems as though this is something that really it's almost something we have to do to make sure that people with disabilities are ultimately given what they deserve. Would that be an accurate statement?
I think absolutely. I mean, the data becomes the basis for that distribution of dollars, but also for the analysis of program needs generally nationwide. And so if the data is not complete, if it doesn't reflect all of the various components of our population, then decision makers and policymakers need to rely on accurate data. And so the Census Bureau is primarily about getting the most complete and accurate count of population. That drives the surveys, it drives other data resources. And so our primary job is to make sure that that count is as accurate as possible.
Right. No, that's so important. And that's, I guess, so for those that are listening, or those that are hearing the rebroadcast of this, please, what Bob has indicated in this last few minutes, and all the information he's given us about the census, it is our obligation. It's part of our role as direct support professionals to make sure not only that we're counted, but the people we support are counted, for all the reasons that we just listed. Again, as Bob said, this is being recorded, so this will be available. I'm going to send a copy of this to Bob, so he has it for his people, and it's going to be certainly available to all of our members, and it'll be on our archive. So with that said, Bob Scartamalia, thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for this very important presentation that you've given us. And we are proud to be and very, very happy to be partners with the United States Census process. So thank you very much. And if anybody needs to reach out to Bob, you see all his information there or any other information, or you can also reach out to the NADSP anytime. So thank you very much, Bob, and good luck with the census this year, and we'll see you in 2030.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to the Alliance for this opportunity to get the information out. This is, let's see, 1980, 90, 2000, 2010. This is my 5th census, so
Wow.
I'm not sure about 2030, but
Yeah. Come on.
Thank you.
You
Thank you.
you can't stay away, Bob. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay.
Bye.